We are joined today here on the stage by two experts in what's happening on the back ends and how the technology starts to impact policy and vice versa. Steve Augustino, who's a partner at Kelley Drye, and Dave Lukowski, who's the executive director of the joint venture Silicon Valley. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for making the time today. We're going to kind of dive right into it. There's been a lot of talk in the past, couple of years around 5G. We all have our 4G devices now, finally, and we're sort of starting to see voice over LTE really start to make a major impact, at least in the US market. And now everyone's all a Twitter or Titter or whatever term you want to use around 5G and what that means both locally and globally. So, Steve, you want to kick it off by talking a little bit about some things that you're seeing around the 5G conversation?
Sure, I'll give it a whirl just to get started. You're right. As soon as it seems like this is what happens in wireless, right? As soon as we get to implementation of one of our generations, we're already talking about the next generation and the wonderful and amazing things that it's going to do. And 5G comes with a lot of promises, and I think the policymakers have bought into all of the promise. You see their speeches and they're talking about 5G is going to enable gigabit speeds on the wireless frequencies. It's going to enable very low latency applications. It's going to be the Internet of everything. That's their idea on this. So they are very active at the FCC on board with trying to pave the way for 5G. And what I see, we'll talk about a couple different things, but it's really several elements to it. First is trying to allocate spectrum that's available for 5G. And in particular, there was some actions at the higher frequencies, the millimeter wave frequencies as it relates to 5G. Second, there's a lot on the infrastructure front that is being addressed there. And then third, there's a lot of discussion about the role of unlicensed versus licensed. And I think you see activities in all three of those areas right now.
Okay. Dave, do you want to dig a little bit on where you're seeing things happen, and then we'll kind of bounce back and forth a little bit?
Yeah, certainly we're seeing a lot of activity right now in 5G, at least in terms of interest in speaking about it. We've had a lot of the cities have kind of had this perception that 5G is like happening any day now. I just had a meeting with one of the big cities in Silicon Valley who they thought it was coming like next year. And of course there have been some announcements recently about early 5G, or I think somebody had 4.9G. And so there's this perception that it's happening like tomorrow.
What, 4.95G and 4.999G?
Yes, and we're back to that insanity, right? So we're back to those crazy days. But the challenge that I think we face is because the frequencies that have been chosen and the density of deployment for 5G is really going to present a huge problem for us. I mean, we're seeing problems in the Silicon Valley where carriers are having trouble getting small cell deployments for 4G, and those are separated maybe by, say, a quarter mile. And then you go back to the city and you say, okay, we need 9 5G sites in between those two that you had trouble getting in the ground. Well, then how does that work? I mean, the cities are not really ready to deploy 4G at this point. They're still resistant to small cells. So how do we move into a 5G world where that 10x increase in density is a reality for that technology? And I don't know how we get there yet.
So basically the cities are looking for all the benefits that they've been hearing, but they're not yet ready to wrestle with the realities of installations and things like that.
There's a perception that you just bolt another G on top of the existing Gs and then you have 5G.
Well, this gee whiz, isn't that how it always worked?
Right. Well, this is, the FCC is aware of this as well, and this problem. And the not in my backyard problem is a significant element of it. What's interesting and what I see from the FCC is we're dealing with an FCC right now where 3-2 decisions seems to be the norm. The 3 Democrats do what they want to do over the objection of the 2 Republicans. And that's just been the norm on a lot of different things. That is not the case with the 5G proceedings.
Okay.
And in fact, on this type of thing, the FCC commissioners have been talking in unanimity here about using the powers that the FCC has to potentially preempt the local regulation in order to make that more easier to deploy.
And that's true, but we just had the ruling in the appeals court recently which said that cities have full control over aesthetics. So what are aesthetics? Well, it's whatever you think looks nice.
Right.
That's a matter of taste, literally, right? Yeah.
But the Republicans, for example, in preempting states and municipalities on local broadband, municipal broadband, disagreed with the commissioner, with the chairman on this. With respect to preempting on this, they said, we kind of agree with you. We have statutory authority for this. Maybe we should. And they are making baby steps moving that way. The commission did announce over the summer that they had struck an amendment to one of their agreements with 2 historic preservation associations to try to ease the approvals. But still, I agree with you, it's going to be a problem because there's just so many more of these that have to be deployed that I don't think we're ready for one of these on every street corner where our stop signs are. I don't think people are ready for that.
Well, David, basically what you said, think about, you now need 10 times more of the antennas in one direction. You do that by the square, and we're looking at 100 times more density, 100 times more towers than what we have today, potentially. Okay, maybe that math isn't great, but I'm from Arkansas. And so we have a situation in which, at the federal level, Steve, you're saying, oh yeah, this is great, full steam ahead. But the locals pushing back and saying, well, wait a minute, it's got to be how we define it to be pretty, and it has to be the right color purple before we put it on the streets. What does this mean for all the companies that are looking at building out services and platforms and tools and startups and funding and everything else around 5G?
Well, I think that it drives to solutions that are aesthetically pleasing. I think that you've seen success of companies that have created technology that, say for example, streetlights that contain 4G sites, and you don't know that that there's a small cell inside of it. So cities are much more willing to adopt those. Now in small little bedroom communities that don't have steel poles, it's still a challenge. But in cities like San Jose, it's been well accepted, and people don't even notice. They're like, oh, look, an LED streetlight. It has a small cell inside of it. What's a small cell? I don't know, because they don't see that box hanging off of the arm. So I think for companies that are developing technology, visually pleasing, aesthetically pleasing, quiet, no fans, no blinking lights, no hanging cables, everything's tucked up inside. Those are going to be more favored by cities, and that's going to get us closer to that goal of that 5G density.
And we're not talking about these 200-foot behemoth towers, right?
No, we're talking about streetlights. They're 35 feet tall.
So gone will be the cell towers made to look like railway trees?
Well, you still need the macro network because small cells operate under control and the head net, right? So you can't get away from macros, but yeah, monopines, monopoles, monopalms will still be out there. But we're going to start seeing a lot more on street furniture. We've even seen companies who've talked about using electric trash compactors or mailboxes as small cell platforms. So there's kind of this notion of camouflage small cell.
So the Postal Service could become a network provider then. So another source of revenue to keep the boys in blue busy.
Bus stops, I was talking to one of our members who said that they're considering that 5G is actually almost like the Comcast Xfinity model, where everyone who has service is a 5G node. And as you're going down the street, you're picking up houses and businesses, and that potentially you could build out the network on private property if you can't get the cities to say yes.
What about, if I can ask, if
Please,
I can take
yes.
your job for a minute, I'm just curious. What about the ideas of the roles of sharing it among carriers? We're going to have 4 providers of this, we're going to need 4 times as many of these towers then?
I guess that depends upon how well their parents raised them, they learn to share. So, we would think that their sharing would be ideal. And certainly we've seen in neutral host DAS, we've seen sharing and using somebody else's infra. It's possible, but I think that becomes then who deploys those networks, and can they build a model that works for all the carriers? And is it price point effective?
So everyone becomes a roaming provider at some level, okay.
Well, I think it's more like a neutral host DAS and say like a casino, where the casino builds out infra, and then they say, okay, Verizon, you put your fiber here, AT&T, you put your fiber here.
Right, it's like what Crown Castle does with their installations,
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing I've seen, I don't know how much viability there really is. This is not much more than a slogan as far as I know at this point.
Okay.
But one of the FCC commissioners, Commissioner Rosenworcel, has suggested a few times that what she would like to see in terms of deployment is a move towards a standard for buildings and facilities like the LEED standard for energy efficiency. She wants a 5G ready standard for buildings, and then that would presumably get more infrastructure in other locations as well.
That makes sense. I mean, given we already have issues with service inside of, and there's a whole cottage industry around how do we help the big towers and the big hotels, things like that, maintain, connectivity in places where, current standards don't penetrate. So 5G, that becomes interesting though.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that idea before in the past, and people talking about broadband ready buildings, same sort of thing. But it would be, I think it would be attractive for the real estate market as well to say, my new mixed-use building is 5G ready.
Right. No, that's really interesting. Any questions from the audience at this stage about what's happening? We got two experts on the... Got a microphone right here. Thank you.
With all the noise, this is a question for clarification. With all...
Sean, can we get...
Wait.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, with all the noise, I didn't hear Steve's comment about an FCC commissioner wanting a 5G standard. Was it for a physical base station, for the dimensions, the mechanical design? Could you please elaborate on that?
I will do my best to elaborate on the standard. Like I said, it's an idea that I have seen in a couple of speeches from Commissioner Rosenworcel. And the idea is to promote the deployment that the industry would come up with a standard and a set of criteria of what it means to be 5G ready or 5G certified. I don't know if I can answer it at that level, whether it's base stations or not. And honestly, I can't tell you whether the idea really has evolved to that level. The analogy is like LEED certified, right? We know LEED has several standards for energy efficiency, silver, gold, et cetera. And so the idea was to take something like that for 5G. And that might promote getting the infrastructure out there, because then the building owners, as they are constructing, would construct whatever facilities are necessary to facilitate it. So I don't know if that's base stations, repeaters, whatever. You're getting beyond my technical knowledge there.
Well, I think it's, the vision is LEED certification, which does not include any kind of physical dimensions at this stage. I think it's more the commissioner saying, hey, we have this green certification called LEED. Could we have a 5G certification that we could call purple or something? And I don't get it's been to define the level of physicality yet. It will make sense at some level, because you can imagine like outlet boxes and things of that sort. There's standard dimensions of things in businesses, but yeah. Derek.
Yeah, I got a question for Steve. So maybe it's a little different than what you were talking about, but I noticed, and I think a lot of people notice now, that the commissioners of the FCC are very political. So there's a lot more, R and D next to each of their names, and they seem to vote along political lines, which aren't clear to me why they go with either side. But my question is, that's a given, I think. That's current today. Has that always been the case, that it was a very political Republican or Democrat commissioner, or is that just kind of a past recent years thing?
Well, I think that the situation we have now is very different than it used to be in the past. The FCC has always, at some level, been a political organization, but most of these issues have not broken down along the Democrat-Republican lines until very recently. There was a lot more of the, incumbent versus new entrant, or rural versus urban kind of things. You'd have certain commissioners that were like, I cared about the rural component of this, and that was their thing. And you'd have differences along those lines. Now, we're in a polarized Washington. We see it in Congress all the time. We've got gridlock there. Unfortunately, that gridlock has moved into the agencies, and at least the FCC at this point, and we are seeing on a norm 3-2 decisions. That's in part why I think this 5G thing is remarkable, because all of the commissioners are in favor of doing these actions to kind of set this thing in motion so that they're ready in 5-10 years when 5G is actually deployed.
David, are you seeing that policies come down to the local level as well, where there's local agendas that are driving some of the engagement around this today, or?
Well, I mean, locally in the Silicon Valley, right? Do we have any Republican politicians anywhere in Northern California? The last one was a city councilman at San Jose who is now gone. So
yeah,
he was the last of the Mohicans. He's moved on. So we have no political issues in the Silicon Valley because everyone's a Democrat.
Okay.
But in terms of the what's breaking, actually, the thing that I'm seeing is that there are now sort of two factions within the Democrat Party. There's the traditionalist, more liberal-leaning, no growth, kind of anti-technology, and then there's the pro-business, pro-technology element of the Democrat Party who are trying to move things forward. And so the fight is no longer in Northern California between Republicans and Democrats.
It's big D and little d.
Yeah, exactly. It's big D, little d. Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. All right. Now, given the fact that the FCC is behind all this stuff, we spent some time on our prep call talking about the shot clock a little bit. How does that come into play? What's the implications for the people in the audience of the shot clock? And how does that help? Are there certain areas that are more friendly to 5G deployments than others based on what you guys are hearing come out?
So if you define Silicon Valley as sort of 6 counties with the county entities themselves, it's over 100 different entities. So they're as varied as the number of entities that we have. So, I mean, ranging from San Jose that's moving full steam ahead on smart city deployments and has a chief innovation officer now that's very technology friendly, a new deputy city manager who came out of industry and is now working for the city. And then you have small bedroom communities that don't even have, they don't know what a small cell is and they don't want them. So in terms of the shot clock, I think one of the challenges that we've been seeing is that cities and to some extent counties have sort of said, we don't know what the heck a shot clock is, nor do we care. Right, we're going to do these on our time, and if we don't like them, we're not going to move them forward. And so they're kind of saying, I don't know what a shot clock is, and then they're getting sued. So there's been a lot of lawsuits, unfortunately, recently, where cities have gotten sued, counties have gotten sued because they're not moving forward on 6409. And now the affirmative decision by the appeals court has given teeth to the side of the cities and the entity, the local governments who have said, like, we are still in control. You can't tell us what to do. If we don't like this project, we're not gonna move it forward. So unfortunately, I think we are heading for a conflict as small cells begin to roll out and we get into this densification. More of these are going to come, and it's a problem.
I was going to say, remember the shot clock is procedural, and it really was designed only to deal with one part of the costs or difficulties in doing deployment, and that was the cost of just delay, of not getting an answer at all.
Right.
So, it is not designed to go to the substance of the question and the decision that's made by the industry. But even with the shot clock, as Dave pointed out, there's been now some concern about the enforcement of that and how you implicate that, because it's costly to then sue the city, and that takes time, and there's delay anyway. The 2 Republican commissioners have been suggesting that they'd like to see the shot clock amended so that it's an automatic approval if the city doesn't act within the time frame.
And that's what we have in California. That's what AB 57 is. It's a deemed approved. If you don't meet your shot clock requirements, the project is deemed approved. At that point, you're going to show up in City Hall saying, "Where's my permit?"
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but and I'm not sure that ends up solving the problem, because are you really going to just start rolling your trucks? Right?
It actually creates more problems. But yeah.
So are you seeing things in DC where they're trying to understand and wrestle with these things at the local level, or is this comes back to the states' rights question?
Well, things go in cycles at the FCC, and so they dealt with shot clock a year or 2 ago, and they'll come back to it again later. So it's not under active consideration now to make any changes to the shot clock.
Now, do you think these kind of local concerns are, in your opinion, Steve, making any meaningful delay in the deployment of 5G, or you think we'll figure this out when we're ready to?
I think time will tell with respect to 5G, right? We're still trying to deploy 4G and 4G LTE which is where a lot of these issues are coming up still now.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Great. One last word, David?
I really do think that we've got to totally adjust the thinking of local governments to make 5G work. I mean, otherwise 5G is going to wind up being relegated to a backhaul technology, possibly some clustered IoT. But if we can't get the deployments that we need, then autonomous vehicles don't move forward, and that whole thing flies right out the window.
And we'll be at 4.9 forever.
And that's exactly what we're doing at Joint Venture Silicon Valley is we just published a report yesterday talking about shot clocks, talking about how cities can work with these new technologies.
Yeah.
And we're trying to educate, because a lot of times the challenge is we get phone calls and say, what's a small cell?
Right.
They don't even know.
Right. That makes sense.
I just want to. I know we're
out of time, but
I want to make one other point just to highlight for people that are out there. The elements of the FCC spectrum plan for 5G. You're seeing this component in a lot of the FCC spectrum plans. There are two elements which are here to stay in any kind of spectrum plan. The first is the idea that there will be sharing in the frequency, particularly sharing with the incumbent government entities and government users.
Okay.
So your technology has to be adaptive for that. And secondly, there is strong, very strong support for unlicensed use. So when they allocated these frequencies for 5G, they left 7 megahertz for unlicensed use, a Wi-Fi equivalent.
Right.
So they really believe in that sandbox approach and that innovation approach in this. And you're going to see that here, you're going to see that from here on out, I think, both of those elements.
That's fantastic. Great. Everyone, help me thank these gentlemen for taking the time today.